Okay, let's unpack this. We're dedicating this deep dive to some counsel that I think is essential for every believer trying to navigate life in this complex and, well, often frustrating world.
It really is.
We're looking at David's wisdom in Psalm 37. One of our listeners actually shared this source. It's a really thoughtful essay on the psalm because they were looking for guidance on one of the most persistent struggles of faith.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. How do you cope with worldly injustice? How do you maintain your personal trust when, frankly, it looks like all the wrong people are winning all the time?
That struggle it's a perpetual pressure point for the soul, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're paying any attention at all to the world, whether it's global news or just seeing things in your own community, that tension is just unavoidable.
Right.
So I think our mission today is to really distill what King David is saying on this exact point.
Hmm.
Why are believers commanded not to fret, not to be envious of the success of the wicked? And more importantly, how do you actively cultivate that kind of patience and trust that's grounded in God's certain sovereign justice?
I love how the source material frames David's voice here. It says he's not speaking from, some rigid, formal throne room.
No, not at all.
Instead, it feels like a seasoned shepherd giving counsel by the evening fire. He's lived this long, turbulent life. He's seen it all, the rise and fall of people, of powers, betrayals. He's sharing what he's learned truly lasts.
And he cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
In the very first verses, he gives you the conflict and the resolution in the same breath. He warns us not to get caught in that emotional trap of fretting, of burning with envy. And why?
Because they will soon wither.
Exactly. They will soon wither like grass, that first image. The suddenness of grass withering in the heat. That's the key. That's the perspective we have to adopt. Their success, no matter how bright it looks today, is fundamentally temporary.
The clarity of the command is what's so arresting to me. It's an immediate prescription for that turmoil you feel inside. And the path forward is so simple, but so strong. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture.
It requires action, trust, and rest.
All three.
And it forces you to slow down. This isn't just passive advice, think a happy thought. David is laying down an entire worldview for the believer. It's the antidote to all the anxiety we get from the 24-hour news cycle, showing us injustice being rewarded.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, when we fret, we're reacting based on this tiny, incomplete snapshot of reality. David forces us to look past that snapshot and anchor our hope in the final, settled reality of God's sovereignty and his timetable. This whole psalm is designed to train your eyes to see past the present flourish of evil to the inevitable future.
Okay, so before we trace the arguments of the psalm itself, let's maybe anchor this in its structure and its context.
Yeah.
Because when you first open up to Psalm 37, you notice it's a wisdom psalm, but it has this very intentional literary form. It's an acrostic.
And that acrostic structure is so critical. You can't just brush past that. In ancient Israel, an acrostic where each line or stanza starts with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it wasn't just a poetic flourish.
It was a tool.
A powerful one. It was a rigorous, systematic device designed to help people remember and internalize the counsel. By giving you this A to Z structure, David is basically saying, this wisdom covers everything. It's comprehensive, it's complete, it's reliable from start to finish. You can't just pick and choose the parts you like. The acrostic demands you take the whole thing.
That makes so much sense. When your soul is being eaten up by fretting, you need a structured way to fight back, not just a nice thought. You need a total restructuring of how you see the world.
Exactly. And that leads us right to the nature of biblical wisdom itself. It's so much more than just clever proverbs or life hacks. Our source material clarifies that for Israel, wisdom was a holistic way of living.
What do you mean by holistic? How did it go beyond just, being prudent?
It meant a life that feared the Lord and walked straight in ordinary duties. It was this deep recognition that all your choices, big and small, are seen by a divine judge. Proverbs 1.7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. David is connecting our deepest emotional reaction to injustice, our fretting, directly to our daily moral walk with God.
So you can't trust God for the big picture if you're compromising in the small things.
You can't. Wisdom, in this context, is the practical daily application of knowing God is sovereign and just.
And this counsel is also anchored in something very concrete for the Israelites who first heard it: God's covenant care. David tells them again and again to dwell in the land and to inherit the land. That's covenant language through and through.
Absolutely. For Israel, the physical land, That
Yeah.
was the visible, tangible sign of God's gift, his favor, his presence. So the call to dwell in the land wasn't just real estate advice. It meant trusting God's promise for a stable, secure life lived under his protective rule. It meant settling down to the steady work of obedience instead of being restless and envious of people who used brute force to get ahead.
So inheriting the land was the visible confirmation of their place in the covenant. But, as you said earlier, the psalm also points to a moral order that goes beyond just the geography of Canaan.
That tension is vital, especially for us today. The land promise was specific to Israel, but the principle underneath it is universal. Lasting security isn't found in what you own, it's found in the character of the Lord. The reason the righteous are secure isn't the fertile soil, it's because God himself is the keeper of the future.
And we see that divine certainty expressed so powerfully when the psalm says, God laughs at scheming wickedness. He laughs because he knows their day is coming.
That is one of the most comforting verses in the whole psalm. God's laughter isn't flippant. It's the absolute certainty of divine knowledge. The wicked are busy plotting for decades, but from God's eternal perspective, he's already seen the final chapter. It's already written.
So their plans are just ridiculous.
They're a momentary interruption on his timeline. Lasting security is tied to humble trust and steady acts of good, not to grasped wealth. The moral order will prevail because the judge of all the earth sees the beginning, the middle, and the guaranteed end.
Okay, this brings us to a really important question, one I'm sure our listeners asking. How do we properly view this land promise through, well, a dispensational lens? How does this apply to the church today when we aren't tied to a specific geographic place?
It's a crucial question. We have to honor the original literal context for Israel, the promise of a safe home under God's rule in that physical land. But the source essay gives us a really helpful, nuanced view for today. We serve the same faithful, covenant-keeping God.
But the focus of the promise shifts.
It does. The Spirit now points believers toward a sure inheritance that is spiritual and eternal.
The New Testament equivalent.
Precisely. The inheritance we look forward to is one that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. That's from 1 Peter. And that's the great anchor of our security. So while the promise shifted from physical geography to eternal glory, the command is exactly the same. Trust God and do good.
That's a fundamental shift in perspective. It means our ultimate security, our greatest inheritance, isn't geographic or political or economic. It's secured in heaven.
And this is immensely practical. It's what allows us to live a holy and useful life right here on earth, grounded not in the stability of the stock market, but in the solidity of that eternal pledge. The moral grain of the universe still runs toward God's justice. The application remains rock solid. Trust God and do good, because your true inheritance is absolutely secure in him. You're just waiting for the appointed time of vindication.
All right, so let's trace the journey of this psalm now, because David walks us through four distinct movements, really building the case for why we can rest in God's justice. And we begin with that immediate, visceral command in verses 1 through 8.
The movement away from envy.
Exactly. The starting point is crystal clear. Refuse to fret, refuse to be envious of wrongdoers. Why does David focus so intensely on envy and fretting? I mean, why not just say, don't sin?
Because envy is uniquely corrosive to faith. It forces you to compare your life, your faithfulness, your struggles against the perceived success of others who seem to be breaking all the rules with no consequences. It immediately shifts your eyes from the faithfulness of God to the supposed effectiveness of evil.
So David is saying, don't even let that emotion take root.
Don't, because it blinds you to their fragility. Their success is a mirage. It's withering like grass. Fretting is just the outward sign of a deep distrust in how God is managing the world.
You know, I keep coming back to that idea of fretting. In our world, with social media constantly bombarding you with comparisons, that feeling of anxiety over what other people have is so amplified. So what's the active, positive alternative David gives us? He gives this dual call, action and devotion.
That replacement is crucial. You have to displace the negative with the positive. And the command is, trust in the Lord and do good. That's the action. And take delight in the Lord. That's the devotion. And that devotional part, delight in the Lord, is the engine of the whole system.
How so?
Well, when your deepest pleasure, your truest delight is found in God himself, your desires naturally start to align with his will.
And that alignment is the context for that incredible promise in verse 4. He will give you the desires of your heart. It's so often misunderstood, isn't it? People think it means God will just give them whatever they want.
It's completely misunderstood. The theological depth here is that it's not a blank check for a new car. It's a profound assurance that when God becomes your ultimate joy, He satisfies that joy by shaping your desires to reflect His own holy purposes. He changes what you want, and then He grants you what you've learned to want.
Which is himself, his kingdom.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. After this call to joy, David invites us to commit your way to the Lord. The essay points out the Hebrew root for commit is galal. What does that word choice tell us?
The Hebrew verb galal literally means to roll or to roll off. It suggests the physical action of rolling a huge burden like a massive stone off your own back and onto the Lord. It implies a complete transfer.
So it's not just a casual prayer for help.
No, it's an active, decisive handing over of your entire life path, the whole burden of responsibility for the outcome onto God's shoulders. You surrender the path and the timing.
And the reward for that radical trust is maybe the most glorious promise in the whole psalm. God will make your vindication shine like the noonday sun.
This is the ultimate, guaranteed public assurance. It means that when you commit your way to Him, even if you are slandered or mocked or lose a battle to the wicked, God guarantees a public, clear, and visible outcome in His time. Your justice won't be a little whisper in the corner.
It'll be undeniable.
Undeniable. Shining with the clarity and power of the sun at its highest point for everyone to see.
But to get to that bright vindication, David imposes a deep discipline: stillness. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. He says we have to refuse to let anger harden our hearts.
That instruction to be still, the Hebrew is demen, is maybe the hardest command in our age of instant response. It implies silence, letting go, ceasing your striding. It is the intentional discipline of resting entirely in God's control, even when every impulse is screaming at you to intervene, to fight back, to defend your reputation.
To take matters into your own hands.
Right. David warns explicitly against letting that anger lure you into evil, meaning using the wicked's own tactics to get what you want. The stillness is the active decision to trust God's timeline, not your own emotional reaction.
So the Psalm's next movement then shifts to exposing the practical futility of the wicked's power. We see them plotting, grinding their teeth against the righteous. But the Lord's perspective just completely undercuts their apparent strength.
We come back to the Lord laughing. And again, this isn't petty mockery. It's the certainty of divine victory. The wicked are plotting for worldly power, seeing a future defined by their own strength. God sees their brief lifespan.
Their mortality.
Yes, their very limited time. He laughs because He already knows their day is coming, the day of judgment, when their strength will just evaporate. Their intricate plans are laughable because they ignore the one factor that actually controls time and destiny.
David then gives this really illustrative detail about how their own violence turns back on them. He talks about their swords and bows breaking or harming their owners.
This is more than just poetry. It's a statement about divine justice. It's about the moral physics of the universe. Evil actions carry their own corrosive cost. The weapon meant for the righteous becomes the tool of the wicked's own undoing. It shows that God ensures the ultimate failure of wickedness by breaking its power.
He breaks their strength, but significantly, He upholds the righteous.
That's the key contrast. Our stability is secured by His hand, not by our own defense mechanisms.
And this movement builds to one of the most countercultural statements in the whole Bible, a powerful kingdom value statement. Better the little that the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked. This requires some serious reflection, especially for us today.
It's a radical reframing of value that you really have to absorb slowly. The source essay clarifies this is not about romanticizing poverty. It's about prioritizing a clean conscience and God's smile, His favor over large, crooked game. Think about it. The wealth of the many wicked often comes with constant turmoil.
Stress, fear of being found out, moral compromises.
Relational emptiness. It's the difference between striving and resting, isn't it? As Proverbs says, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. The little that the righteous have comes with peace of mind, security in God's presence, the clear conscience.
So the righteous have a better quality of life, regardless of the quantity.
That's it, exactly. The wicked's abundance comes at the cost of their soul and their peace. The size of the bank account matters far less than the condition of the soul.
Okay, so the third movement of the psalm then gives this profound assurance that the Lord is actively engaged in preserving and providing for His people, especially during hardship. David promises absolute security for the blameless. Their days are under the Lord's care, and their inheritance will endure forever.
That phrase, under the Lord's care, means security isn't based on external things like a good economy. It's entirely relational. It's founded on the covenant-keeping nature of God Himself. And that care translates directly into provision, even when things are dire everywhere else.
And we see that promise articulated so strikingly in verse 19. In times of disaster and famine, they will enjoy plenty. I mean, that is an audacious promise, especially given the brutal realities of David's time. Famine meant death.
And the wicked, by contrast, vanish like scorched flowers. The contrast is stark. The showy prosperity of the wicked is fragile. It's susceptible to the first sharp turn of fortune, a drought, a war, and illness. But the righteous, even though they face the same disaster, are sustained by a source that's independent of the external economy.
So enjoying plenty doesn't necessarily mean extravagance.
Not at all. It means sufficiency. It means timely provision from God Himself, sustaining their lives and their integrity when everything else is failing.
And this divine care is then mirrored in the character of the righteous person. The wicked take, they harm, they lose. But the righteous are open-handed, lending freely, showing mercy.
Character is both the result and the evidence of trusting God's provision. A person who is consumed by fear has to hoard, but a person who trusts God's security is free to be generous because they know their source is eternal. They aren't defined by scarcity, but by mercy.
David then brings the focus right down to the microscopic level of daily life. God orders our steps. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. But we have to acknowledge the realism here. Even the righteous stumble.
No, life isn't perfect, and this is where the comfort of the gospel really shines through, even in the Old Testament. David offers this profound comfort for those inevitable stumbles. If they stumble, they are not cast headlong, for the Lord upholds them with His hand.
Meaning God doesn't abandon us in our weakness.
Exactly. Our failures don't result in eternal ruin because God has a grip on His faithful ones. He uses even the stumbles and the setbacks to teach us steadiness, humility, and utter reliance on His sustaining hand.
And then David's personal testimony breaks in, giving this whole section just tremendous weight. An eyewitness account. I was young, and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread.
That's a staggering observation spanning decades of war, kingship, personal turmoil. We have to handle that claim carefully, of course. It doesn't mean no righteous person ever struggles financially. The Bible shows us otherwise.
So what does it mean?
It means they are never ultimately forsaken by God's covenant loyalty. The provision might look different than they expected. It might be manna in the wilderness, not a feast at a king's table. But it's sufficient, it's timely, and it's a testament to the absolute faithfulness of God.
All right, so the psalm concludes with a final warning and a restatement of the core counsel. The tension is still there. The wicked continue to lie in wait for the righteous. The threat is ongoing.
The threat is real, but the divine protection is greater. The Lord assures the faithful. He will not abandon them or allow false verdicts to stand against them. This is an assurance that even when the legal or social systems are corrupted, God maintains the ultimate court of appeal, and His verdict will be the final one.
The final counsel reinforces that theme of active faith. Hope in the Lord and keep His way. It's that continued discipline of trust and obedience, even when the wait feels long.
And then David offers that powerful, unforgettable anecdote, a memory from his long life. He describes watching a truly ruthless, successful person spread out like a native tree. To all appearances, this person was permanent, powerful, deeply rooted.
But then he looked again.
And the person was just gone, a brief shadow with no roots remained.
That imagery of the native tree versus the scorched flower is so memorable. It contrasts the illusion of permanence with the sudden reality of complete disappearance.
It's the ultimate visual argument against envy. What looks solid and unshakable today might be revealed tomorrow as having no true foundation at all. The wicked have no roots in eternal stability. But, by stark contrast, David concludes with the guaranteed future of the blameless. Their end is peace, because the Lord is their stronghold. Peace is the definitive outcome for the righteous, no matter how chaotic the middle may have been.
Okay, so we've walked through the text. We've felt the weight of David's counsel. Let's transition now to the deeper theological implications. So, what does this all mean for the believer anchored in the larger story of redemption?
Well, the core theological significance is tied directly to that problem of injustice. The psalm doesn't give you a philosophical treatise explaining every case of suffering, but it solves the problem by forcing you into the larger cosmic story. It reminds you that God is the one who manages the timeline. He provides justice in His time and lifts the humble in His way.
So the real danger of envy is that it makes us forget that ultimate reality. It locks our eyes on the immediate, temporary success of evil rather than trusting God's eternal timeline.
Precisely. Envy lures the righteous into corrosive anger and shortcuts that destroy trust, because they forget that the showy success of evil is just thin ice. It will not hold under God's judgment. This moral order is rooted in God's character as judge.
And this counsel provides a critical theological basis for restraint, warning us not to take vengeance into our own hands. David says, "Be still," and that command finds its ultimate expression in the New Testament.
It connects immediately and powerfully to Romans 12.19. Believers are told not to retaliate, do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord.
So we can wait, we can be still, because we know with certainty that the avenger is righteous and sure.
The promise that God will make your vindication shine like the sun is the only thing that truly enables you to let go of that destructive temptation to become your own avenger. Our job is to wait in peace, not to fight back in anger.
That's a huge shift. If you believe God is guaranteeing your vindication, you don't need to nervously defend yourself.
It frees you from that burden. And furthermore, the psalm sheds spiritual light on wealth and lack. That statement, "better the little," is more than a life principle. It's a powerful theological declaration about where true blessing is found.
Let's clarify that. If peace with God is better than crooked wealth, what does that little provide that wealth can't?
It provides the quality of life that money can't buy: contentment, rest, assurance, and the clear conscience of being in right relationship with God. It's the conviction that a righteous relationship with God provides a better quality of life than any material quantity achieved outside of His will.
And this assurance of provision flows right into the New Testament understanding of God meeting our needs, like in Philippians.
Yes, David's observation that the righteous are never forsaken echoes that wider assurance in the New Covenant that "my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of His glory in Christ Jesus." The essay helps clarify that this provision isn't always about removing hardship. It's about supplying grace, help, and daily bread through the hardship. God's faithfulness is our resource, even when the world's resources dry up.
Finally, running through the entire psalm is this rock-solid affirmation of God's holiness. The Lord who laughs at proud plots. He is holy and absolutely sure.
He is a holy God, and therefore, He cannot let a crooked measure define the ultimate future of His creation. That holiness grounds the entire process of waiting. It's the confidence that the universe is governed by righteousness, not chaos. If God is holy, justice is guaranteed, and the prosperity of the wicked is necessarily short-lived. That theological truth allows the believer to rest.
Okay, we've established the background and the theological guarantees. For our listener, the thoughtful Christian trying to live this out daily, what are the key, actionable spiritual lessons? How do we take this truth and move it into our steps?
I think the first step is constant self-aware vigilance against the mechanism of envy. It grows when we fall into that trap of measuring our quiet, often challenging faithfulness against the loud, showy success of others. It's an inward comparison that just steals joy.
So when your soul tightens up, when you see that injustice, what's the immediate practical prescription?
David gives us a dual action. Trust the Lord and do good. This means an active redirection of your focus. When that emotion flares up, you have to stop the internal measuring, acknowledge that the external success is illusory, and immediately turn your attention back to your own sphere of obedience. Plant yourself where He has placed you. Cultivate joy in Him.
Can we make that concrete? Say I get overlooked for a promotion and it goes to a colleague who I know cuts corners. The fretting and anger are intense. What does the steady work of good look like right then?
It looks like this. Instead of mentally rehearsing the injustice or plotting how to get back at them, you answer that feeling with prayer and the immediate steady work of doing what is right, regardless of the outcome. The essay stresses that this dual discipline, trust and obedience, tames the heat of anger and the sting of fear. You fight envy not by suppressing it, but by displacing it with positive action and devotion to God. You refuse to let their success redefine your calling.
All right, the second lesson. Practice patience that acts. We've established that waiting here is not passive, it's active faith. But how do we distinguish waiting from just doing nothing?
We distinguish it by remembering that verb, gallo, rolling our way onto the Lord. Active faith continues to do what is right, the daily ordinary duties, while consciously leaving the timing and the outcome entirely in God's hands. The work doesn't stop, the worry stops. Our obedience is our job. Vindication is God's job.
And this active patience profoundly dictates how we respond to being wronged. It's the refusal of revenge.
It is the practical outworking of Romans 12. Active patience refuses to play the wicked's game. Instead, it looks for quiet ways to serve, to give and to bless, even when injustice seems to be winning. It's profound wisdom. You maintain a steady, virtuous course, knowing that justice belongs solely to God. We are free from the pressure to settle the score.
But what about those moments when we do stumble, or the situation just looks hopeless? David's assurance that the Lord upholds us has to be a tremendous comfort during that long wait.
It is the ultimate insurance policy. The daily choice to keep walking, even when stumbling, becomes a powerful witness to the world that a greater power holds our future. Our endurance is visible proof of divine sustainment. God doesn't promise we won't fall. He promises we won't be cast headlong. We won't suffer final ruin. He uses those moments to teach us reliance and deep steadiness.
And the third lesson, embrace contentment and generosity. This really requires us to reframe our values. Better the little with God than the abundance without Him.
Contentment, in this context, is not resignation. It's restful trust. It's the active assurance that God, who owns everything, provides what is necessary for today and secures our future. And that restful trust, crucially, is what frees our hands to give.
Because if you're consumed by fear of lack, you have to hoard.
But if you trust God's promise of provision, your hands are open. You're ready to lend freely. David connects this immediately to the character of the righteous. They're always generous. Generosity is the outward sign of inward contentment.
And that links right back to 1 Timothy. Godliness with contentment is great gain.
Exactly. A generous life is the natural outgrowth of a life rooted in God's deep, unshakable security. We have to hold our possessions with an open grip to avoid the mastery of the love of money. When we live contentedly and generously, we fulfill the core moral demand of the psalm.
It sounds like the antidote to envy is a life so saturated with trust, patience, and generosity that you stop caring about the short-term fortunes of the wicked. Your focus is entirely on the eternal goodness of God.
That is the goal of Psalm 37. It is spiritual maturity applied to material anxiety. It is the training manual for a believer who recognizes they are a pilgrim and their citizenship is secured in a kingdom that cannot be shaken.
Psalm 37 is a profound piece of spiritual training. It trains our eyes to see past the immediate glare of human power and toward the Lord who weighs hearts, who orders steps, and who absolutely keeps His promises. It calls us to take definite action, trust, do good, commit our path to God, and above all, be still.
It steels us against the pull of envy by reminding us again and again that wicked success is thin, it's transient, while the Lord's mercy and justice are eternal. It gives us the courage to refuse revenge and continue in goodness, because we know our ultimate safety and inheritance are guaranteed.
And that certainty spans the ages. We honor God's specific care for Israel in the land promise, while we recognize that we receive our sure heavenly inheritance in Christ, kept safe from any threat. Our confidence is fixed on what is eternal.
The overarching promise is that our deliverance is certain, not because of our own strength, but because our trust is rightly placed in God. And to close, we can turn back to the final, powerful words of the psalm itself, which summarize its great encouragement.
Psalm 37, verses 39 and 40. The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in time of trouble. The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them, because they take refuge in Him.
The encouragement there is that the Lord acts as a powerful, unshakable stronghold, a fortress, and He saves those who deliberately choose to take refuge in Him. Our salvation and security are external to us. They come entirely from the Lord. We find safety not by fighting our enemies, but by running to Him.
And that refuge is available right now. May the Lord direct your heart into His love and the endurance of Christ, so that you can keep going with steady hands and clear eyes, trusting that in due time He will lift up the meek and settle all accounts with perfect holy wisdom.
Amen. Keep walking in His way.